Welcome to the deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at 9 Supreme Court cases that just wrapped up oral arguments in October. Get ready, because these cases are all over the place, from hidden evidence in murder trials to the EPA regulating the smell of fish. Yeah, you heard me right. It's going to be interesting.
What's interesting about these cases is that they really reflect kind of these broader societal tensions. We're seeing clashes between state and federal power, questions about how far the government can actually reach, and even debates about fairness in our justice system.
Okay, let's give everyone a little sneak peek at the legal roller coaster that we're about to hop on. We'll start with Williams v. Washington. Imagine you're on trial for murder, and then you find out that the prosecution actually had notes that basically said that the key witness against you was a liar. Talk about a plot twist. This case dives into what the prosecution has to turn over to the defense and what happens when they don't.
Next up, we're going from murder mysteries to the very complex world of legal settlements with Royal Canin U.S.A. Inc. v. Wullschleger. This one asks, when can you really claim victory in a lawsuit and get those attorney fees right? Turns out, even if you win a temporary injunction, the answer might surprise you.
Then we'll tackle 2 immigration cases that ask some important questions about how much power the government really has. In Garland, Att'y v. VanDerStok, we'll explore the reasons behind why visas get denied and whether the government has to be more transparent in its decisions. Actually telling people why their visa was denied, imagine that.
And in Bouarfa v. Mayorkas, I guess, of Homeland Security, we're looking at the right to a fair hearing when facing deportation. This case focuses on procedural errors that happen during immigration proceedings. Small things that could have major consequences for someone trying to stay in the country.
Okay, get ready for a bit of a somber turn now, because Lackey v. Stinnie dives into the limits of punishment. This case asks if you can still be punished for a crime even after you've served your time. We're talking about restrictions on sex offenders. How far can those restrictions go before they're considered cruel and unusual punishment?
Then we have another case that looks at how important a fair trial really is. Glossip v. Oklahoma. This is a death penalty case where the defense says that the prosecution actually hid important evidence that could have saved their client's life. It's a real reminder of the power that prosecutors have and how important a fair trial is for everyone, especially when life is on the line.
All right, now for an issue that's been in the news constantly. Medical marijuana, Inc. v. Horn, takes us to the middle of the battle between state and federal marijuana laws. Even though many states have legalized marijuana, it's still illegal federally. This case looks at whether the federal government can prosecute people for marijuana stuff, even in states where it's legal. Talk about a legal tug of war.
Next up, we'll be focusing on veterans' rights with Bufkin v. McDonough, Second Food of VA. This case is all about the complicated world of proving service-connected disabilities and how much weight the courts should give to what the VA decides. It's a really important issue for veterans who are trying to get benefits for injuries or illnesses that happened while they were serving our country.
And finally, get ready to take a deep breath of, well, maybe not so fresh air, because San Francisco v. EPA tackles the EPA's power to regulate, wait for it, the smell of fish. Oh, it's really about the EPA's authority over city sewage systems and how far they can go in setting environmental standards.
This whole group of cases really shows us how the government's role in our lives is changing and how the Supreme Court is dealing with those changes.
All right, so we got 9 cases here, and each one has the potential to change the legal landscape. Are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's start with Williams v. Washington. What I think is so interesting about this case is that it makes us think about the idea that sometimes the truth is actually hidden in plain sight.
Ooh, I love a good legal mystery. So walk me through this one. What are the key facts here, and why should we care?
Well, you've got a man, Mr. Williams, who was convicted of murder, and a lot of that was based on the testimony of a key witness, Justin Sneed. Years later, the defense finds notes that were written by a jail psychiatrist who actually talked to Sneed before the trial even happened.
And these notes are saying that Sneed might not be the most reliable guy.
Well, one of the notes straight up says Sneed is a liar.
Hmm.
And there are other notes that suggest Sneed had mental health problems that could have messed with his testimony. The defense is really upset, saying the prosecution had these notes the whole time and never gave them up.
Hold on. So the prosecution had evidence that could have helped the defense, and they just kept it to themselves. Isn't that a huge no-no legally?
It's a massive no-no. The defense is saying this is a Brady violation, which means that the prosecution hid evidence that would have helped the defendant and maybe even violated his right to a fair trial.
Okay, so that's why this case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. What could happen here? What if the court sides with Mr. Williams?
This case could change how prosecutors handle evidence. If the court says there was a Brady violation, we could see stricter rules about what evidence has to be given to the defense, even if they don't specifically ask for it.
So this case that seems kind of obscure could actually have a big impact on how criminal trials work in the future. That's why we love the deep dive, uncovering those hidden connections.
Exactly. Now, are you ready to switch from detective mode to business mode?
Bring on those legal briefs and the power suits. What's next?
Let's talk about Royal Canin, U.S.A. Inc. v. Wullschleger. This one's about legal settlements, and when someone can say they won and get those attorney fees, it might not sound as exciting as a murder trial, but trust me, it has its own intrigue.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So basically, Royal Canin sued Wullschleger over how they labeled their products and got what's called a preliminary injunction. This forced Wullschleger to change their labels, right? But then, before they even went to trial, the law changed, and Royal Canin's whole case was moot.
So the case just disappeared, like a magic trick.
Pretty much. But here's the thing. Royal Canin says they still won and wants Wullschleger to pay their lawyer fees. They say that the preliminary injunction got them what they wanted, even though it was temporary.
So the big question is, does a preliminary injunction, which isn't a final decision, really count as a win?
That is the million-dollar question. And the answer could mean a lot of money for businesses and people who end up in court. If the court sides with Royal Canin, more people might try to get preliminary injunctions just to rack up lawyer fees, even if their case isn't that strong.
Wow, so this technical case about lawyer fees could change how businesses think about going to court. That's wild.
Exactly. It shows us that even boring details in the law can affect the real world in a big way.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about immigration law. Our next case is Garland, Att'y VanDerStok. What makes this one stand out?
Okay, imagine applying for a visa and getting denied. And then they give you some vague reason like, we're worried about national security. That's what happened to Mr. VanDerStok. And he's arguing that the government needs to be way more specific when they deny visas.
So it's not enough to just give a general reason. They need to explain why someone is considered a security risk.
That's exactly what Mr. VanDerStok is saying. He says that without a better explanation, he can't really challenge the decision or even understand what he supposedly did wrong. It's about fairness and transparency in the immigration process.
This feels like it could change how the government deals with visa applications and denials.
It totally could. If the court sides with Mr. VanDerStok, we might see more transparency in visa decisions, which would be great for anyone who's ever felt lost in that immigration system.
All right, on to our second immigration case. Bouarfa v. Mayorkas, Att'y of Homeland Security. This one's all about mistakes made during deportation proceedings. Tell me more about why this matters so much.
Imagine you're in a deportation hearing and they say you only have a few days to get evidence and prepare your defense. Or imagine you don't understand what's happening because the translator isn't doing a good job. These are the kinds of procedural errors that Mr. Bouarfa is claiming denied him a fair chance.
So it's not about whether he should have been deported or not. It's about whether the process itself was fair and followed the rules.
You got it. This case brings up the issue of due process for non-citizens in the U.S. Even if someone isn't allowed to stay in the country, they still deserve a fair hearing where their rights are respected.
It seems like those procedural errors, even if they seem small, can have a huge impact on someone's life.
Huge impact. These mistakes can be the difference between staying in the country with your family and being sent back to a place that's dangerous. That's why this case is so important. It's about making sure that everyone, no matter their immigration status, is treated fairly under the law. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're ready to keep digging into these 9 Supreme Court cases. They could change the rules on all kinds of things, from criminal justice to the environment.
All right, let's pick up where we left off. I'm ready to dive in.
Okay, let's switch gears a little. We're going to talk about a case that asks, what happens after someone finishes their prison sentence? Lackey v. Stinnie looks at whether rules for sex offenders can go too far and become cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah, this one seems tough. I mean, we want to keep people safe, right? But you also don't want to keep punishing someone forever for a crime they already did their time for.
It is about finding a balance. We're talking about things like where sex offenders can live, like not being able to live near schools or parks, and even rules about what they can do online.
I see how those restrictions could feel like they're still being punished, even after they finish their sentence.
And that's exactly what the people challenging these rules are saying. They argue that these rules are too broad, make life too hard, and don't really connect to stopping future crimes.
So it seems like the court is trying to figure out where to draw that line. How do you keep the public safe without punishing people too much who have already served their time.
Right. The court's decision could change how we think about helping people who committed sex offenses re-enter society. It might make states move away from those general restrictions and instead focus on assessing each person individually and helping them in ways that actually work.
Now let's look at another case with really high stakes. Glossip v. Oklahoma. This one involves the death penalty. And the defense says the prosecution didn't share evidence that could have kept their client from being executed.
This case is about what we call a Brady violation, which we talked about earlier in Williams v. Washington. It's when the prosecution doesn't give the defense evidence that could help them, even if they don't ask for it specifically.
And when it's a death penalty case, things are even more serious. Any piece of evidence could mean life or death.
Absolutely. In this case, the defense is saying the prosecution didn't give them notes from a jail psychiatrist who interviewed Justin Sneed. Sneed was the main witness against Mr. Glossip. And these notes suggest Sneed might have had mental health issues that could have made his testimony unreliable.
So the defense is saying if they had these notes, they could have shown Sneed wasn't a believable witness and maybe even cast doubt on everything he said.
Exactly. But the prosecution is saying even if they messed up, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the trial. They're saying there was enough other evidence against Mr. Glossip to convict him anyway.
This case really shows how much responsibility prosecutors have to make sure trials are fair. It's not just about winning. They have to make sure the process is fair for everyone.
Right. What the court decides in this case could affect death penalty cases all over the country. It might mean prosecutors have to share more evidence. And we might even see them re-examining old convictions where the evidence might have been shaky.
All right, let's move on from the death penalty to something that's been in the news a lot lately. Legalizing marijuana. Medical marijuana, Inky v. Horn, takes us into this battle between state and federal marijuana laws.
This case really shows the legal mess we're in right now. More and more states are saying marijuana is okay to use medically or recreationally. But the federal government still says it's illegal.
So even if you're following your state's law where marijuana is legal, the feds could still come after you. That sounds super confusing.
That's exactly the problem this case is trying to solve. The people suing Medical Marijuana, Inc. are saying it's not right for the feds to go after people in states where it's legal. They say it goes against states' rights.
This is not just about weed. It's about who gets to decide what's legal in each state.
You got it. What the court decides could have a huge impact on the marijuana industry and whether more states legalize it. It's also about this big question of how much power the states have compared to the federal government.
Okay, enough about getting high. Let's talk about veterans' rights. The next case, Bufkin v. McDonough, 2nd of VA, focuses on proving disabilities connected to military service and this idea of giving veterans the benefit of the doubt.
This case is important for anyone who's served in the military or knows someone who has. It's about how tough it is for veterans to prove that their health problems now are because of their service.
I can imagine that would be really hard. Some injuries or illnesses might not show up until years later, and trying to prove they're connected to something that happened during service would be a nightmare.
That's where this benefit of the doubt comes in. Basically, if the evidence is kind of equal for and against the veteran's claim, the veteran should win.
So it's like tilting the scales a little bit in their favor because they sacrifice so much and it's hard to prove these things.
Exactly. But there's been debate about how this should actually work. In this case, Mr. Bufkin, who served in Vietnam, says the VA didn't do this right when they looked at his claim.
So this case is about making sure the VA is doing what it's supposed to do and taking care of veterans, especially when the evidence isn't clear-cut.
Right. The court's decision could clarify how the VA makes these decisions and hopefully make it easier for veterans to get the benefits they deserve.
Okay, we're at our last case for this part of the show. San Francisco v. EPA. It might seem a little weird at first, but it's really about how much power the EPA has and who gets to make decisions, the federal government or local governments.
You're right. It might sound fishy at first glance, but it's about more than just smelly ocean water. This case is about whether the EPA can control city sewage systems and how strict those environmental rules can be.
So is San Francisco saying, hey, we know what we're doing, back off EPA?
Basically. So San Francisco has this big wastewater treatment plant. It cleans the water and then releases it into the Pacific Ocean. The EPA gave them a permit for this plant, and that permit says how much pollution they can release. But San Francisco says some of those rules are too strict, and the EPA doesn't have the power to make them.
So it's that classic battle, federal versus local control.
Yep. It makes us ask, How do we protect the environment while also letting local governments make their own decisions?
This case could have a big impact on environmental laws everywhere. If the court agrees with San Francisco, the EPA might have less power, and local governments might get to decide more about their own environmental policies. But if the court says the EPA is right, it could make the agency even stronger in enforcing environmental rules across the whole country.
We've covered a lot in this part of our deep dive. We've looked at cases about individual rights, the balance of power, and what role the government should play in our lives. Are you ready for the last part?
Definitely. I want to hear how you bring all of this together and what you think these cases could mean for us.
Let's jump into the final part and see what we can learn from these 9 cases.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've gone through 9 Supreme Court cases. Each one had its own surprises. Now it's time to step back and look at the bigger picture. What connects these cases, and how might they affect you?
One thing that really stands out to me is this idea of fairness that keeps coming up. It's not just about what the law says, it's about how it's used and whether the process is fair.
Right, we saw that in cases like Williams v. Washington and Glossip v. Oklahoma. It wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was about whether the prosecution was honest. Did they share all the evidence? And in Bouarfa v. Mayorkas, the question was about mistakes in the immigration system. Did those mistakes prevent someone from getting a fair hearing?
These cases remind us that the legal system is more than just following the rules. It's about making sure everyone has a fair chance and protecting people's rights, even when they've been accused of doing something wrong.
Another theme was tension between the states and the federal government. Like in medical marijuana, Inc. v. Horn. State versus federal laws on marijuana is a big conflict right now.
It's a classic struggle that goes way back. Who gets to decide what's legal in each state? This case could have a big impact on other areas where state and federal laws clash, not just marijuana.
And we saw a lot of cases involving government agencies, like the EPA and the VA. It seems like the court is always having to settle arguments between these agencies and individuals or even whole cities, like in San Francisco v. EPA.
It's a sign of how much the government is involved in our lives. As things get more complicated, we rely on these agencies to regulate all sorts of things, from the environment to veterans' benefits. But that also raises questions about who is watching these agencies, how transparent are they, and how much power should they have?
So why should the average person care about what's happening in the Supreme Court?
Because these cases affect you directly. They affect your rights, your freedoms, even your money. Knowing how the court interprets the law can help you make better decisions in your own life.
Right, like if you're a business owner, Royal Canin U.S.A. Inc. v. Wullschleger might make you think twice about going for a preliminary injunction. You want to know the risks. Or if you're a veteran, Bufkin v. McDonough, second v. VA, could affect your benefits.
And even if these specific cases don't directly involve you, they can show you bigger trends in society and how things are changing between individuals, the government, and the law.
It's a reminder that the Supreme Court isn't just some far-off institution. It has real power. And its decisions shape the rules we all live by.
As we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. We've explored these 9 cases. They show how complex the law is and the challenges we face as a society. But behind all the legal stuff, there are human stories.
It's easy to get lost in the legal language and procedures, but we can't forget the real people whose lives are affected by these decisions.
Every case involves real people. It might be someone facing a murder charge, or an immigrant hoping for a better life, or a veteran trying to get the benefits they earned, or a city fighting for its independence. These cases show us that the law isn't just about rules on paper. It's about people and fighting for what's right.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something about the Supreme Court and how its decisions affect all of us.
Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay involved in the things that matter to you.